This is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're exploring a campaign requiring state health officials to digitize and index vital records, including historic documents that might be more than 100 years old. And our guest is Alec Ferretti, a professional genealogist specializing in the genealogy of 20th century immigrants, and is on the board of directors of the Association of Professional Genealogists. Welcome to the show, Alec.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
It's our pleasure. So, clearly, someone with your professional interest is going to have a vested interest in accessing some of these historical records that the state health officials have stored away. But I think some listeners might be surprised to know that these are documents that there are reasons why they may end up needing access to, and getting them can be a real challenge. So can you begin by talking about what are some of the types of records that state health officials maintain and are part of this push to digitize and index?
So this really goes back to Napoleon, because Napoleon was the first government official to start mandating that the government itself registers records of everybody who was born, married, and died. And that's in the early 1800s. And this spreads from Central Europe around much of the world over the next 200 years. And in the US, different states started at different times. And in New York, we're actually one of the laggard states, for at least for the Northeast, where we did not begin record keeping until 1881. But from 1881 to the present, everybody who was born, married, or died in New York State should have had a certificate documenting this. And it's on file with the health department. And it's kind of the cornerstone document of your identity. You and I have birth certificates, obviously, and they're on file with a health department, if not New York. Mine's in New York. And these are, for historical research, incredibly valuable because they are usually some of the most detailed biographical informational sketches about somebody. So if somebody died in 1939, you can get their death certificate, and it will list out, who they were, where they were born, when they were born, who their parents are, what happened to their body, where they're buried. And this is useful for all kinds of historical information. But the problem in New York is that there's no real mechanism to make the older ones widely accessible to the public. Under the current regulations in force, they are technically available after about 50 or 75 years, depending on the type. But the Department of Health has sole access to a lot of these records, and they have essentially decided to stop processing requests for them. So if I were to submit a request for, let's say, my great-great-grandfather's death certificate from 1922, they would get it and cash the check, but I would never see the document. And I actually read about 2 weeks ago, they have now a new policy of not even cashing the checks or accepting the orders. But for the last 5 or 6 years, they would at least cash the check, and that was it. I think right now they've about a 6-year backlog. And even before the pandemic, they had always about a 9 to 12 month backlog for these historical requests. So I remember back in high school, I requested a record for an uncle. And, I ordered it at the beginning of the school year, and I got it like that spring. So it's been months and months for a long time. But now in the modern era, it's gone from 5 to 6 years to, as of February, just they are not processing requests at all.
Well, if I'm a listener, why do I care about this? Do I break out the world's smallest violin for the genealogist because I don't care? Or is there a reason why I, John Q. Public, some average New Yorker, might encounter this system because there's a record I need, and now I'm going to wish we had a more accessible and speedier system?
There's really two answers to that, because there's the answer for why the historic records matter. And then there's the relevance to how the health department is also not really providing good customer service to people who want their own records as well. And they're separate problems, but obviously related because it's the same records at the same place. But for the historic part of it, these historical records are the foundational documents of all of our identities. And if you truly just hate history and don't care, then I won't convince you in these 5 minutes. But these documents are incredibly valuable because they help people reconstruct family medical histories. They can reconnect Holocaust survivors. They can be some of the sole documents that talk about the genealogies of formerly enslaved people. These are incredibly detailed biographical sketches of a lot of individuals who don't have much other records documenting them. Harriet Tubman's death certificate is on file in Albany, and we have no way of getting this record right now. If we want to understand what happened to her, we could not get this file realistically. Now, obviously, if you don't care about history, then we'll have to move on. I think the bigger issue for the average constituent just navigating the world, raising a family, going to their job, is that the health department has also done a really poor job of giving access to people's own records, these modern records. Because despite the fact that the historical ones might take years to get, they they often put us at the end of the line because they claim they're working on the certified copies for the modern people getting their own records first, which has been an excuse they've been saying for years and years and years and years. Yet there's still a horrible backlog for those records. So if you were to request your own birth certificate from the health department, I'm assuming you're born in New York.
You got it.
So if you were to request it from Albany, you would not see it for 9 to 12 months. So if you need your birth certificate for a passport or your marriage license or whatever you might need your birth certificate for, you'd make your request to them fairly innocently. You'd assume you're going to get it back in a month, a couple of weeks, whatever normal government workflows are. And then you're not going to receive anything from them until next year. And there's very little communication about them with them about this. They closed their in-person office during the pandemic and did not reopen it. They've outsourced their customer service to a third party, so it's really hard to get a hold of anybody. They actually deactivated their email system for the most part. And I eventually can find emails if you really search, but like their main inbox, you get a bounce back saying this email is no longer monitored. Please call our third-party contractor. So getting your own records becomes really difficult. Now, what the state would probably say in response to that is that there's a copy maintained at the town level as well. So the average person can go to the town and get the record there and probably get it in a week or so. So there's no impending crisis for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But the state often has the more robust records and the centralized index of everything. So, if you don't know the exact town where you got your marriage license, you can't get the license from the town. I was trying to order my dad's second marriage recently, and he insisted he got the license in the town of Oyster Bay. And I'm like, are you sure you were not living there at the time? You only got married there. And he was positive he did. And of course, he didn't. So people are regularly not going to know the exact municipality where the hospital was where their dad died 25 years ago. And then they need the death certificate. And they're going to have to go to the state to have them search everything. And in that case, it's going to be a 9 to 12 month wait. So the real problem is the Department of Health has not properly advocated for staffing, and maybe they've internally attempted this and just gotten nowhere. I can't tell you that, but the health department needs people to be processing vital records requests, and they are not processing vital records requests. Not at all for the genealogists, and really, really slowly for everybody else. And for comparison, most states take a month or two at tops.
Well, what does a meaningful, robust, responsive system look like? And from your perspective, how do we get there? What are the steps that need to take effect?
So again, we have to kind of look at, both issues of the old and the new. Every state has incredibly different vital records laws. There are some states where every record is public. So if you were born in Ohio or Massachusetts or California, anybody could order your birth certificate. In other states, records are closed for 100 years. New York is kind of in the middle. But anyway, even ignoring that, there's a lot of functional states where you can order a record online, it costs a couple of dollars, and they will process the request in a day or two. So if you want a Florida record, you can relatively cheaply order it from Florida online, by mail, and often in a week or so you'll have your record. There's a lot of other states where the historic records either move to the archives or get digitized, and that's not really the case for people who want their own certified copies of modern records, where those aren't usually going online. But for genealogists, the main thing we care about, of course, is the older stuff. And the real solution to that is what I just said. In most states, there is access to the older records that does not involve health department clerks processing requests manually. The researchers can do it themselves at an archive that's specifically designed to house historic records, or they're scanned by a third-party company, or sometimes even the state, and posted online for just personal research through the internet.
In the governor's veto of a bill in 2025 that was intended to prompt this digitization effort, the governor said, "No worries, I am directing the Department of Health to assess vendors that can assist with digitizing vital records, so no need to require this in statute." Have you seen anything in the actions, or have you heard anything since this October 2025 veto that would indicate there's progress being made by the Department of Health?
So yes, I want to thank the governor for keeping to her word. In her proposed budget for 2027, she put in $7 million for digitization of vital records. 5 million of that was for contracting with a third party, and 2 million of that was for increased staffing. And as of I think Wednesday, when the one House bills came out from both the Assembly and the Senate, that $7 million was kept in.
Oh, well.
So we are on track to get the $7 million appropriation for vital records, which is obviously fantastic news. It only solves part of the problem because there is a major records management problem at the Department of Health, which we don't really have time to go into today.
Correct.
But there's a lot of difficulties with finding things and storing things and preserving things, but we'll just kind of gloss past that. So that will all be solved by a massive infusion of millions of dollars to digitize everything. The problem is the budget is to digitize them. So the Department of Health will scan these records and have them on a big hard drive, and it's still at the Department of Health with no public access. So maybe if they scan everything in 5 years, they might have enough staff to process things faster. And maybe if they want to prioritize genealogists, they'll process our things faster or not. Like if the SAVE Act were to pass, for example, now all of a sudden there could be millions of more people trying to get their vital records. And for the last 5 years, the DOH has been saying, well, it's been real ID. So many people need their birth certificates for real ID. We can't deal with you annoying genealogists. Well, real ID finally happened. But if the SAVE Act happens, we're back where we started, where there's going to be a flood of people trying to get their birth certificates to register to vote. And now it's going to be the SAVE Act is the thing that's going to prevent us from getting our records. And even if it's all scanned and they're just hitting click print, if they choose to not click print and send it to us, we won't get the records without some other mechanism to require them to process requests or ideally move them to the archives or put them online.
Well, sounds like a lot of variables that we get to explore in the future, but for now we're out of time. We've been speaking with Alec Ferretti. He's a professional genealogist and serves on the board of directors of the Association of Professional Genealogists. Alec, that was a lot of fun. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Support for the Capitol Press Room comes from O'Donnell and Associates, a public affairs firm providing strategic guidance to businesses and nonprofits on navigating policy and regulatory issues. More information is available at o'donnellsolutions.com.